If you look at how a massive global corporation presents itself to the world, they usually have this incredibly strict brand manual.
Oh, right. The psychological architecture of it all.
Exactly. It dictates everything. Like it tells you exactly what Pantone colors to use, what the font spacing should be, what the logo is supposed to subtly imply about their core values.
Yeah, they want that instant recognition. And I mean, more importantly, instant trust. You see the logo, your brain processes the brand promise, and you know exactly what you're interacting with.
Right. It's a tightly curated, heavily engineered identity designed to make you feel a very specific way the second you look at it. But how does a whole country manage to pull that
Which
off?
is a lot harder than branding a shoe company, obviously.
Yeah, especially a country that is geographically just absurd in its scale, wildly diverse, and, well, relatively young on the global stage. So, welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are exploring a super fascinating text today. It's a concentrated study guide based on pages 38 to 43 of Discover Canada. And what we are looking at is essentially the blueprint of a nation.
Yeah, it really is a blueprint.
It shows us how a country curates its identity and how that identity is permanently welded to its economic survival.
Which is an angle we honestly don't often take when looking at national history. I mean, we tend to put the abstract symbols in one box.
With the flags and the anthem.
Exactly. We put those in one box, and the heavy machinery of the economy, the trade routes, the natural resources, we put all that in a completely separate box.
Right.
But as this text reveals, you really cannot understand one without fully grasping the other. They're the exact same story.
So for you listening, whether you're prepping for a citizenship exam or you're just hungry for knowledge, our mission today is to pull this blueprint apart without making you feel overwhelmed by dates and trivia.
Yeah, we want to bypass the standard historical lists and really get into the mechanics.
All right, we want to give you the why and the how behind the what. We've got a clear roadmap for this deep dive. Block 1 is going to be the symbols that forge Canadian identity.
The visual and emotional touchstones.
Yep. And Block 2 is the massive, diverse economy that sustains the nation. And we're going to see how those two blocks are just deeply intertwined, how a symbol can actually unify a continent, and how geography dictates destiny.
Because when you understand the underlying logic, I mean, the actual causality behind why a country develops the way it does, the history stops being just trivia. It becomes a highly functional machine that makes perfect sense.
Let's start with the public face of that machine then. Block 1. The visual identity of Canada. The official symbols that project its history, its values, and its institutions to the rest of the world.
A brand identity, basically.
Exactly. And the most recognizable piece of that toolkit is obviously the flag. The current design, the stark red and white with the single maple leaf, which was actually adopted relatively recently in 1965.
Which is quite modern for a national flag, if you think about it.
Oh, for sure.
But the power of that specific design is that while the flag itself is a 20th century creation, the central image, the maple leaf, has a much deeper historical footprint.
Right. It wasn't just invented in a boardroom in the 60s.
Exactly. It had been utilized as a recognizable Canadian emblem on military uniforms, on coinage, and in historical heraldry for generations prior. It was this organic symbol that eventually earned the premier spot on the flagpole.
It was an evolution, not a reinvention. And that toolkit extends beyond the visual, too. You have the audio branding, I guess you could call it.
The national anthem.
Yeah, O Canada.
Yeah.
Which is deployed at sporting events and official acts to project this shared unity.
And you also have the emotional touchstones.
Right, like Remembrance Day on November 11th. The text highlights how honoring those who served and died in conflicts is universally symbolized by the red poppy.
Yeah, that's a huge unifying symbol.
And then there are institutions woven into the identity, like the coat of arms, national sports, and the iconic Mounties, the RCMP.
Because these are the shared rituals. I mean, in a country spanning nearly 10 million square kilometers, you need these unifying touchstones.
Just to keep it all together.
Right, so a person in Halifax and a person in Vancouver feel like they are participating in the exact same national project.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have this very clean, naturalistic, modern identity. A flag from 1965 featuring a leaf. A highly recognizable police force. Sports. But then the text leans heavily into the crown.
Ah, yes. The constitutional monarchy.
Right. Canada is a constitutional monarchy. The crown represents the Canadian state and is ubiquitous in official institutions, the courts, and ceremonies. And I have to push back on this a bit.
Go for it.
Why does a country with such a clean, modern, environmentally themed visual identity rely so fundamentally on an ancient, old-world symbol like a monarch's crown? To a casual observer, it feels like a massive clash of brands.
Well, what's fascinating here is that we often misinterpret what the crown actually does in a system like this.
How do you mean?
It is not just a decorative antique or a nostalgic nod to the past. The crown represents the actual functioning legal state. It is the institutional operating system of Canada.
So you're saying it's less about castles and royal pageantry and more about how the laws actually function on a Tuesday?
Precisely. In a constitutional monarchy, the crown acts as a foundational anchor. It separates the head of state from the head of government.
Okay.
Politicians come and go, governments fall, elections change the landscape, but the crown represents the unbroken, continuous line of legal authority and the rule of law. It absorbs the political shocks.
Oh, wow. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah, and because that legal foundation is so deep and so immovable, it actually provides the security necessary for those modern symbols, like a newly designed 1965 flag, to flourish.
That makes a lot of sense.
You can completely redesign the logo on the front door of the building, but only because the foundation of the building is made of constitutional bedrock.
That reframes it entirely. The crown is the legal architecture, and the flag is how the house presents itself to the neighborhood.
Exactly.
But this raises a practical question, transitioning us to block 2. We have this toolkit of abstract concepts, right? Constitutional bedrock, anthems, flags, poppies.
Right.
How do we get from abstract concepts to a tangible, breathing country? I mean, nations aren't willed into existence just by drawing a nice leaf on a piece of fabric.
No, they definitely are not. They built through necessity, through grueling physical labor, and through trade.
The physical building of Canada.
Yeah, the transition from an abstract idea to a mapped reality was driven by an intense economic imperative.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because the text points to the beaver.
The beaver, yes.
Yeah.
The bridge between identity and economy.
Right. Now, the beaver is an official national symbol, but it didn't become a symbol because it's cute. It is directly, inextricably tied to the fur trade.
The foundational industry.
Yeah, and the fur trade was the crucial early economic activity that brought Europeans and Indigenous peoples into contact during Canada's formative centuries. When I read this, I couldn't help but view the beaver as like the ultimate Silicon Valley tech startup of early North America. It was a disruptive force.
Okay, I would actually push back on the startup label a bit, even though I see the disruption angle you're going for.
Right, really? Why?
Well, a tech startup usually implies creating a new virtual market out of thin air in a relatively sterile environment. The fur trade was the exact opposite of that. It was a brutal physical extraction industry operating in an unforgiving wilderness.
Fair point. There was definitely no ping pong table in the wilderness.
But structurally, it functioned like a massive market disruptor, right?
In terms of market dynamics, absolutely. The beaver pelt was a high-value, aggressively sought-after global commodity. The European demand for fur hats literally mapped the Canadian interior.
It's wild that fashion drove exploration. It really did. It forced complex supply chains to be built across thousands of miles of rivers and lakes. And most importantly, the Europeans couldn't just extract it themselves.
Right. They didn't know the land.
Exactly. They absolutely relied on the deep generational knowledge of the indigenous peoples who knew the geography and the waterways. It forced entirely different cultures to negotiate, to ally, and to build these massive commercial networks.
So it wasn't a mascot.
Yeah.
It was the product that financed the exploration of the continent.
It was the foundational engine. You just don't get the modern map of Canada without the pursuit of the beaver. It bridged the gap between the physical land itself and the eventual national identity.
Which proves that a country's symbols are forged by its earliest economic reality.
Absolutely.
Which is the perfect transition to the modern reality.
Yeah.
We move from this historical single commodity fur trade economy to what the text outlines today. Canada is one of the world's strongest, most multifaceted economies.
The sheer scale of the transition is pretty wild to think about.
It really is. It spans natural resources, advanced manufacturing, global services, high-tech, and international trade.
And it does all of this over a staggering geographic footprint. It's not a centralized economy operating out of one mega city. It is a tapestry of massive regional economies that all have very different specialties.
Let's actually walk through the geographic map the text provides because the causality here is fascinating. We start in the prairies.
Right, the heartland.
This region is the powerhouse of agriculture and energy. The text explicitly notes Alberta as the oil and gas giant of the country.
A huge economic driver.
And then you have Saskatchewan, which is known not just for wheat and general agriculture, but as a massive global supplier of minerals like potash.
Yeah, potash is incredibly important for global agriculture.
And Manitoba chips in with agriculture, manufacturing, and these incredibly important water resources.
And that prairie economy is fundamentally driven by the physical landscape, you know? Vast arable plains sitting right on top of immense energy reserves.
Right. But when you move eastward to central Canada, meaning Ontario and Quebec, the landscape and the economy shift entirely.
They do. The text highlights Ontario and Quebec as the hubs of manufacturing, finance, technology, culture, and trade.
Toronto is cited as the largest financial center in the country, right?
Yes. And Montreal is vital for culture, but also heavily emphasized for trade, tech, and transport.
And again, look at the geography. They are situated along the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River.
Which gave them historical shipping access.
Right, which bred population density, which in turn bred manufacturing and financial centers. Now, contrast that with the West Coast.
British Columbia.
Exactly. The text describes BC as Pacific-facing. Its entire economic posture is different. It's focused on Asian trade, major shipping ports, forestry, tourism, and its own specific natural resources.
It's physically separated from the rest of the country by the Rocky Mountains, so it naturally looks outward across the Pacific.
Exactly. And then swinging to the complete opposite side of the continent, you have the Atlantic provinces. Their economy and identity are entirely shaped by their maritime geography.
Right. It's built around fishing, offshore energy extraction, tourism, and vital Atlantic ports that connect North America to Europe.
And we absolutely cannot forget the North. The text puts a very specific emphasis on the Canadian North.
It's a huge part of the identity.
It is characterized by a much smaller population, sure, but it possesses unique geography, massive natural resource potential in mining and energy, and a profound indigenous presence.
The North is distinct because its value isn't just measured in GDP. The text makes it clear that this vast region is crucial for Canada's sovereignty and its national identity on the global stage.
So what does this all mean for a country spread so wide? I mean, I'm looking at this economic map, and logistically it looks incredibly fractured.
It does seem that way on paper.
Right. You have a Pacific port economy in BC looking to Asia. You have high finance and heavy manufacturing locked in the center. You have an oil and gas empire in the prairies and a maritime fishing economy in the east. How does this machine actually function as a single country instead of 5 separate nations competing with each other?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, that extreme regional diversity isn't a vulnerability at all. It is actually Canada's greatest economic shock absorber.
A shock absorber. How does that play out in practice?
Think of the national economy like a highly diversified mutual fund. Because the regions are driven by entirely different global forces, they balance each other out.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's say there is a massive global drop in the price of oil. That is going to cause severe economic pain in Alberta.
Right, obviously.
However, that same drop in energy prices lowers the cost of manufacturing and often depresses the national currency, which suddenly makes the manufacturing sector in Ontario incredibly competitive for export.
Oh,
The center booms while the West contracts. Or, if Atlantic fishing faces a downturn, the tech sector in Montreal or the Asian trade flowing through Vancouver can help offset the national ledger. They act as counterweights to global volatility.
That makes total sense. They aren't just stapled together. They are actively hedging against each other's risks.
Exactly.
And go back to the North for a second. You mentioned sovereignty. It's not just about extracting diamonds or energy from the ice, is it?
No, not at all. It's about geopolitical reality. In international relations, you cannot simply draw a line on a map over millions of square miles of Arctic territory and say, well, this is ours.
Right, you have to actually be there.
You have to demonstrate actual presence and utilization. That is why the indigenous communities in the North are so incredibly vital to the modern state. Their historical and continued presence in that geography is the human anchor that secures Canada's claim to the Arctic.
It is a perfect example of identity and survival overlapping.
It really is.
So we have this highly complex, regionally diversified internal engine. But the text is very clear that this engine relies on a massive external connection to truly hum the global anchor of this entire system.
The relationship with the United States.
Right. The text notes that the U.S. is Canada's principal trading partner
Hmm.
and that they share one of the most important commercial relationships on Earth. It's basically the world's busiest economic conveyor belt crossing that border every single day.
And it goes far beyond simply trading finished goods. We are talking about deep structural supply chain integration.
Like with cars and stuff.
Yeah, in sectors like automotive manufacturing, a single component might cross the US-Canada border half a dozen times, being refined and assembled in different plants in Michigan and Ontario before the final vehicle even rolls off the line.
Which requires an insane level of coordination. I mean, you can't have a border holdup if your factory operates on just-in-time manufacturing.
No, the legal and logistical framework has to be flawless.
But this brings up a really surprising detail from the source material. Up to this point, we've been talking heavily about physical, tangible things, barrels of oil, lumber, potash, wheat, beaver pelts, heavy stuff you can put on a train.
Right.
But the text explicitly pivots and lists skilled workers, education, and respect for the law as primary economic drivers. It literally treats respect for the law as if it were a natural resource, right alongside oil and timber.
Yeah, and this raises an important question, right? Hey, what actually sustains a top-tier global economy in the modern era?
It's not just digging stuff up.
Exactly. Because having raw materials isn't enough. If all you have is stuff in the ground, you aren't a global economic power. You're just a quarry waiting to be dug up by someone else.
Just a giant hardware store for the rest of the world.
That's exactly it. To turn raw geography into a high-functioning economy, you need an invisible infrastructure.
Yeah.
Legal stability, a highly educated workforce, and a societal consensus around enterprise and hard work.
The soft skills of nation building.
Yeah. When a foreign entity invests billions in central Canada, or when the U.S. integrates its critical supply chains across the border, they aren't just trusting the quality of the steel. They are trusting the legal system.
Right. They know that contracts will be ruthlessly honored.
They know the workforce has the advanced education to operate high-tech facilities.
They are investing in the operating system,
Yeah.
which actually circles us all the way back to the very beginning of the deep dive. The Crown.
Yes, exactly.
That institutional stability, the unbroken constitutional rule of law that we talked about as a symbol of identity, is the exact same respect for the law that functions as the bedrock of the modern economy.
They are completely inseparable. The symbol is the economy, and the economy relies on the institution the symbol represents. It is a closed, highly functional loop.
Man, this has been a massive journey through the blueprint of a nation. Let's do a quick recap for you listening. We started with Block 1, the visual identity, the 1965 maple leaf flag, the emotional resonance of the poppy on Remembrance Day, the anthem of O Canada.
All those crucial unifying touchstones.
Right. And we unpacked how the crown serves as the constitutional anchor that allows those modern symbols to thrive.
And then in Block 2, we saw how the physical geography shaped the map, how the historic Beaver bridged the gap between Indigenous and European networks through the fur trade, laying the groundwork for what we have now.
A massive, diversified economic shock absorber.
Mm-hmm.
From prairie agriculture and energy to central Canadian finance and manufacturing, out to the Pacific ports of BC, the maritime economy of the Atlantic, and the sovereign anchor of the North.
All of it tied globally to the United States through a shared reliance on education and the rule of law.
It's a testament to how complex nation building actually is. It's never just drawing lines on a map. It's a constant negotiation with the land and the global market.
Right.
But we want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that builds on this entire evolution. The text shows us clearly that the beaver emerged as a powerful national symbol because it was the undisputed economic driver of its era.
It literally forced the country to form.
But as we just explored, Canada's modern economy is pivoting incredibly fast. It is moving rapidly toward advanced technology, green energy, AI, and adapting to a changing Arctic landscape.
The foundational engine is always upgrading.
So here's the question for you to consider today. What is going to be the next symbol to emerge? If you jump 100 or 200 years into the future, will a totally new symbol naturally arise from today's massive economic shifts to define Canada's future identity?
Will it be something born out of the tech sector?
Or something tied to the changing geopolitical reality of the North? Keep a close eye on where the economic machinery is heading because as we learned today, the national symbols are guaranteed to follow right behind it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.